I never imagined silence could be so terrifying until the day it was shattered by my mother's screams. It started on a dreary Thursday afternoon, the kind where the sky is a bleak shade of gray and the wind whispers secrets through the cracks in the walls of our old house. I was sitting at the kitchen table, mindlessly scrolling through my phone when it happened. The scream. It sliced through the air sharp and unyielding, emanating from the living room. Dropping my phone, I rushed in, expecting to find my mother hurt or in danger. But she was just standing there, in the middle of the room, her eyes wide with an indescribable terror, her mouth open in an endless scream. At first, I thought she saw a spider or a mouse, something trivial, but the sheer terror in her eyes told a different story. "Mom," I approached cautiously, my heart pounding in my chest. "What's wrong?" She didn't respond, didn't even seem to hear me. Her scream continued, a constant unbroken sound that seemed to fill the entire house. It was eerie, unsettling, like nothing I've ever heard before. I reached out to touch her shoulder, and she flinched away from me, still screaming. Panic set in. I didn't know what to do. I tried talking to her, shaking her gently, but nothing worked. Her scream went on, as if she was stuck in a never-ending cycle of terror. I grabbed my phone and called 911, stuttering out our address and the situation to the operator. The ambulance arrived quickly, but the paramedics were just as baffled as I was. They examined her, asked questions she couldn't answer, and finally they took her away, her scream echoing down the street as they loaded her into the back of the ambulance. I followed in a daze, feeling like I was trapped in a nightmare. At the hospital, they ran tests, but everything came back normal. Her vocal cords were not damaged. There was no sign of trauma or illness, nothing that could explain why she couldn't stop screaming. Days turned into weeks. The doctors tried everything, sedatives, therapy, even experimental treatments, but nothing worked. My mother was moved to a specialized facility, a place where they could care for her around the clock. The house was painfully silent without her. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong, something more than medical science could explain. I began to research, digging into old books, scouring the internet for anything that could give me an answer. That's when I stumbled upon an old legend, a story about a woman cursed to scream for eternity as punishment for a crime she didn't commit. The details were murky, lost to time, but one thing was clear. The curse was passed down through generations, waiting to be triggered. I couldn't believe it at first. Curses were the stuff of fairy tales and horror movies, not real life. But the more I read, the more I couldn't shake the feeling that this was the answer. My family had always been secretive about our past, and now I wondered if this was why. The realization hit me like a ton of bricks. My mother's screams were a curse, a punishment for something our ancestors had done. And now, it was my turn to find a way to break it. I pored over old books, talked to experts in folklore and the occult, searching for any clue that could help me to save my mother. The more I learned, the more I realized how little I actually knew. The screams haunted me, even when I wasn't at the facility. They echoed in my dreams, a constant reminder of the nightmare my life had become. I was losing hope, spiraling into despair, when I found it. An old book, hidden in the back of a dusty library, spoke of a ritual that could break the curse. It was dangerous, requiring a sacrifice and a leap of faith into the unknown. But I was desperate, willing to do anything to save my mother. The night of the ritual was the darkest I've ever seen. The moon was hidden behind thick clouds, and the air was heavy with the promise of a storm. I set up the ritual in the woods behind our house, the place where the legend said the curse had first been cast. I followed the instructions to the letter, my hands shaking as I lit the candles and recited the ancient words. The wind picked up, howling through the trees, and for a moment, I thought I heard my mother's scream carried on the breeze. And then, everything went silent. The candles flickered out, and I was plunged into darkness. I felt a chill run up my spine, a sense of dread so intense, it was almost physical. When I woke, I was lying on the cold, damp ground, the remnants of the ritual scattered around me. The air was still, unnaturally so, as if the world was holding its breath. I scrambled to my feet, a sense of urgency driving me. I needed to know if it had worked, if the curse was broken. Rushing back to the house, I was met with an eerie silence. The constant unsettling backdrop of my mother's screams was gone. My heart raced as I grabbed the keys and drove to the facility where she was being held. The nurse looked at me with a mix of surprise and confusion as I burst through the doors. "My mother!" I gasped out of breath. "Is she?" One of them nodded, leading me to her room. I stepped inside. I braced myself for what I might find. But there she was, sitting up in bed, her eyes clear for the first time in weeks. And she was silent. "Mom?" My voice was barely above a whisper, a mix of hope and disbelief. She turned to me, a small tentative smile on her face. "I'm here," she said, her voice hoarse but beautiful to my ears. The relief was overwhelming, and I rushed to her side, tears streaming down my face. We held each other, a moment of peace in the storm that had been our lives. But the relief was short-lived. As days passed, I noticed changes in myself. I became jumpy, easily started by the smallest noise. My dreams were plagued by screams, not my mother's anymore, but a chorus of voices, angry and accusing. I tried to ignore it, to focus on my mother's recovery, but the dreams became more intense, more real. I would wake up in the middle of the night, my throat sore as if I had been screaming for hours. And then, one night, it happened. I woke up to find myself standing in the middle of the woods, the same spot where I had performed the ritual. My hands were raw, my nails broken and bloody, as if I'd been clawing at something. I didn't remember walking there, didn't remember leaving my bed. Panic set in, a deep gnawing fear that I had unleashed something terrible. I tried to tell myself that it was stress, exhaustion, anything but the truth. But deep down, I knew the curse wasn't broken. It simply found a new victim, me. I sought help, visiting doctors, therapists, anyone who might have answers. But how do you explain a curse to someone who lives in the world of science and logic? How do you fight something that's not supposed to exist? The screaming in my dreams grew louder, more insistent. It was as if the voices were trying to tell me something, but I couldn't understand. I was losing grip on reality, slipping into a world of shadows and whispers. My mother, now fully recovered, began to notice the changes in me. I saw the worry in her eyes, the fear that she might lose her child, as she had almost been lost. But I couldn't tell her the truth. I couldn't burden her with the knowledge that the curse had not been lifted, only transferred. I returned to the old books, the legends and the myths, searching for another way to break the curse. But the more I read, the more I realized the terrible truth. The curse was tied to our family, a chain that bound us to the past, to the sins of our ancestors, and there was only one way to break it. The realization chilled me to the bone. I knew what I had to do, but the thought of it filled me with dread. To break the curse, I had to face the source, confront the past that had haunted my family for generations. I started digging into our family's history, uncovering secrets long buried. The more I learned, the more the pieces fell into place. The curse was a punishment, a retribution for a crime committed so long ago that it had been forgotten by all but a few. And now, it was up to me to right that wrong, to face the darkness that lurked in the hearts of my family. I had to go back to the beginning, to the place where it all started. The journey was long, taking me to a small forgotten town nestled in the mountains. The air was heavy with the weight of the unspoken secrets, and the people watched me with wary eyes, as if they knew why I had come. I found the old house, the birthplace of the curse, abandoned and crumbling. The air inside was thick with the scent of decay, and the shadows seemed to move, whispering secrets in a language I couldn't understand. But I wasn't alone. The spirits of the past were there, waiting for me. Their voices a cacophony in my mind. They showed me the visions of the past, a crime so heinous it stained the very soul of my family. I saw the truth in those visions, a truth that had been hidden for generations. The curse, it turned out, was born of a betrayal, a grave injustice committed by my ancestors. They had wronged someone, a woman accused of witchcraft who was innocent. In her final moments, consumed by pain and injustice, she had cursed my family, condemning us to suffer as she had suffered. As the visions faded, I understood what I needed to do. The curse could only be lifted with a sacrifice, a life given willingly to right the wrongs of the past. I knew then that it had to be me. I was the last of my line, the end of a legacy tainted by cruelty and lies. The decision weighed heavily on me, a burden I carried as I made my way back to my mother. I couldn't tell her the truth, couldn't put that weight on her shoulders. Instead, I told her that I loved her, that everything would be okay. It was the hardest lie I ever told. That night I returned to the old house, the epicenter of the curse. The air was cold, the moon a sliver in the sky, casting long shadows across the ground. I could feel the eyes of the spirits on me, their whispers a constant presence in my mind. I set up the ritual, just as the visions had shown me. Candles flickered in the darkness, their light casting eerie shadows on the walls. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my shaking hands. As I began to recite the ancient words, the wind picked up, howling through the broken windows. The spirits gathered around me, their forms shimmering in the candlelight. I could feel their pain, their anger, but also their hope. The ritual required a sacrifice, a life given freely to break the chain of suffering. I closed my eyes, focusing on the words, on the weight of my decision. I thought of my mother, of the life she would have after I was gone, free from the curse that had plagued our family for so long. And then, with a final whisper, I completed the ritual. The candle snuffed out, plunging the room into darkness. I felt a rush of energy, a release, as if a great weight had been lifted from my shoulders. In that moment, I knew it was done. The curse was broken, the spirits freed from their eternal torment. I could feel them fading away, their whispers turning into sighs of relief. As the darkness closed in, I felt a sense of peace. I had done what was necessary, paid the price for the sins of my ancestors. My last thought was of my mother, of the life she would now be able to live, free from the shadows of the past. When they found me the next day, the curse was lifted and the spirits were at rest. The old house, once a symbol of our family's shame, was now just an empty shell, its secrets finally laid to rest. My mother mourned, but in her heart she knew that I had made the right choice. She lived the rest of her days in peace, a peace that had been denied to our family for generations. And me? I was just a memory, a whisper on the wind, but I was at peace too. I had ended the curse, broken the chain that had bound us. In the end, it was a small price to pay for the freedom of those I loved. Thank you for listening to My Mother Cannot Stop Screaming. If you enjoyed this story, please leave a like, and if you enjoy hearing stories from me, please subscribe and become a resident of Hill Street, and let me know how I'm doing in the comments. And I hope all of you have a fantastic night.